Thank you, LYNEports, for hosting this second webinar. Today, we were discussing about engineering tomorrow's aerodrome, designing for safety, efficiency, and sustainability. Good afternoon, everyone. As aviation and advanced air mobility gains momentum, the design and operation of aerodromes and vertiports will define the future of urban aviation. This panel will explore how industry leaders are navigating the complex interplay of safety, efficiency, and sustainability while designing aerodromes that are future-proof and operationally feasible. The discussion brings together leading experts from regulatory, design, and operational backgrounds to share insights on shaping the next generation of urban air mobility infrastructure. My name is Benjamin Spiske. I'm an architect and expert in vertical infrastructure with Abboud Swiss and Aerodromes, the leader in heliport and vertiport design and planning. I'm honored to be moderating this discussion with experts who have played a pivot role in designing and regulating the future of urban air mobility. Let's introduce our impressive list of panels. Dunia Abboud, an advanced air mobility and sustainability expert at Bureau Veritas, focusing on safety, sustainability, and regulatory frameworks. She co-chairs the Advanced Aviation Advisory Committee at the Flight Safety Foundation and advises the French ICAO AAM study group on sustainability. With a background at the International Civil Aviation Organization, Dunia excels in partnerships, innovation, and driving sustainable growth in aviation. Thank you. Maria Krylova. Maria is an expert in aviation, urban development, and architecture. Based in Frankfurt, she specialized in transport infrastructure construction, focusing on advanced air mobility and airport planning. Most recently, she played a key role in developing infrastructure for the air taxi startup Volocopter, contributing the launch of the first non-commercial vertiport and facility for aircraft testing, maintenance, and final assembly in April 2023. Passionate about integrating urban air development into aviation, she continues to drive innovation in air mobility infrastructure. Diego, with 25 years of experience in airport development, Diego is an aviation expert with global experience in airport planning, design, construction, operations. An accredited airport executive, he has led major projects across the Middle East, Asia, Latin America, Europe, and Africa, including Dubai, Riyadh, Jeddah, and Neom. He played a key role in the $4.3 billion expansion of the Dulles International Airport and worked with the FAA on traffic flow management modernization. José Ignacio Rodríguez is the managing director of Blueness by Global Avia, an innovation business line focused on advanced air mobility and vertiport management, and a key player in developing infrastructure for air logistics, passenger transport, and automated services utilizing eVTOLs. José has been instrumental in forming strategic partnerships to advanced air mobility initiatives. Blueness participates in CESA U-Space and vertiport integration Eureka projects to enhance the commercialization and development of UAM projects. Payal Satish is a seasoned commercial leader with 19 years of experience in aviation, hospitality, and travel. As a commercial director at Blade India, she drives sales, marketing, network, and UAM expansion, shaping India's urban air mobility growth. Previously, she held key roles in Air Asia India, Thai, KPMG, and Marriott, and founded Explorer Travel India. Last but not least, Dušan Sekulić is an architect and designer with a special interest in the relationship between architecture and nature, as well as the future of mobility and aviation. He's currently a project manager at Delegan Meisel Associate Architects in Vienna. His work includes a master thesis on an urban airport in Ljubljana for VTOL and STOL aircraft, and a visionary redesign of Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. Let me provide you a teaser about today's discussion and talking about the future of vertiport design. How are safety, efficiency, and sustainability shaping the next generation of vertiports? Panelists will discuss the evolution of design principles, operational challenges, and regulatory frameworks that will define the future of urban air mobility. Innovative solutions for AM integration, the role of software and digital planning tools in aerodrome design will be explored. Experts will discuss how real-time simulation, AI-driven modeling, and automation can enhance the planning and operational feasibility. Let's get started. José, I would like to ask you the first question. How do you balance safety and regulatory compliances while still enabling future-proof, scalable vertiport designs?
Well, thank you, Benjamin, for the question. It's a very important one. First, we ensure the regulatory compliance by looking at all the standards that are now available, okay, by EASA, by FAA. We try to certify our vertiports. At the beginning, we are looking at heliport design standards. The Annex 14 from ICAO is what we follow in Qatar when we built our first heliport. It was a good learning experience. So first, you look at the vertiport, which is guidance material, the vertiport prototype specifications, and also the engineering brief 105 from FAA. And ICAO is working also in this. So we try to balance the certification on the guidance that is available, also the heliport regulation. And in parallel, we are also considering to have a viable model with not so expensive designs for vertiports. We are looking at a space which has future expansion, lightweight materials, modular scalability in the, not only catering for the current demand, but also for the future demand. We envision a smooth, but also slow transition from heliport to vertiport wall. We need to consider then this additional equipment, spaces for the recharge stations and so on. Obstacle-free volumes are different in some standards than in others. So we are looking to try to comply, as we are an international company, with different regulations worldwide, FAA, EASA, and what ICAO is also drafting currently.
Thank you. Clear. Maria, maybe you can give your, let's say, take on that from the architectural perspective, what you think about it.
Yes, thank you very much. As José mentioned already, of course, we have all these regulations and we're trying to look at this, but let's say from architectural perspective or from the construction and building perspective, I think the password is flexibility and multifunctionality, because like from the experience in Volocopter, for example, Volocopter built its first facility like fully based on the requirements for the company, and originally it's supposed to be only the testing facilities, but eventually it ended up of hosting a maintenance team, production, final assembly, offices, storage areas, testing, passenger experience simulations, and stuff like this. So and as you know, the planning process, it takes years, like from planning to the final construction until you have the finished facility. It really takes a lot of time. So actually at the beginning, you have to design something for what you don't know how it will be used. So you have to include in the design as much adaptability as possible. So you need to have like an open spaces that can be separated in a different way. You need to reserve additional spaces that could have a multifunctional use. You have to provide like engineering systems that can supply different areas. And the same is actually relevant for the vertiport, because like again in the experience with Volocopter, there was also like actually one of the first vertiports, one of the first certified vertiports in Germany. It's just not passenger vertiport, but vertiport for testing. But again, also it covered a huge area, but also was divided with different surfaces. So one part of the vertiport was made of like concrete surface, the other part was made of aluminium, so that you can ensure different testing and different reaction of the surface when you test the aircraft. And also like there were different possibilities to fix the aircraft that is being tested. So I would say like the multifunctionality principle is the key. And also, if I may add also, like if we're talking about vertiports for different commercial use, there was also a project of vertiport in Singapore, for example, which was supposed to be operated by different types of aircraft by different companies, and was designed together with a joint venture. So there it is even more complicated, because you need to combine all the requirements of different companies, and you need to reserve pretty large areas for maintenance, for charging, for testing, or for spare parts. And because there's no standard in advanced air mobility yet, you have to provide all individuals. So that means like the vertiport itself, it can be a relatively small facility. It can be like up to 250 square meters, for example. You can fit like the passenger process in there if it's not international. But the area for facility for all this maintenance and operational and charging stuff, it's actually, requires way more space, and if we're talking about multiple companies, it will take even more space to cover the needs at the beginning.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, a lot of going on. Let's say we don't know yet from the planning perspective where it ends, but I think we can also count on experience like Diego's in the call as well in the meeting. And I think Diego, you are the most senior in airport planning, and I think you can give a lot to that.
Thank you for the senior comment.
Yeah, but I think it is like that.
Thank you, Ben. No, I
don't take it wrong.
Yeah, no. I appreciate it. I heard 25 years and it scared me a little bit. But yes, no, there's no question. I mean, and there's a little bit of elements of all of this that echoes other technologies that have been promised that just never came to fruition. This one is exciting though, because we see it moving forward. But I think that some of the challenges that we have, and again, I want to focus on that we're talking about passenger transport as the next frontier. I think, when it comes to just delivering goods and values, I think people are doing it. How to use AAM for other than moving passenger, that's kind of has its own path already, and it's moving forward quite fast. But I think that we definitely have challenges with regulatory adaptation, and Jose already spoke about it, and Maria mentioned that current regulations are based on traditional airports and heliports, and it just makes vertiport approval slow and inflexible, and it's difficult, especially in urban areas, which is ultimately where we want to get to. Zoning challenges, many cities just lack a dedicated zoning framework, and they don't move that fast to actually figure out that you need to have a new way of thinking when it comes to this, so it just leads to unnecessary restrictions and delays. And for those who are heavily invested in production of equipment, that is just it's a death wish. And again, one of the other things that is quite difficult is airspace integration. The existing air traffic management systems, they're just not designed for high frequency eVTOL operations in urban areas. They're just not there. And if we look at the context of, for example, cities in the United States, where if you guys look at the airspace on any given day, it's just packed. And you look at the interactions between anything AAM and passenger aircraft or traditional transport, if you think about it, it becomes even a little bit more daunting to see what, how that's going to work. And we've been working on air traffic management modernization, and we've gotten pretty good about it, but still with outdated data and outdated equipment and outdated processes. So I think that that's going to be a challenge. And that leads to standardization gaps. And I think you guys and a lot of people on this panel know more about that than I do. But the manufacturers have varying infrastructure needs, and there's some interoperability issues. So at some point, you're kind of like leading to that each manufacturer has to have their own facility in some cases, just because there's there may be some things in there that are incredibly proprietary. And I think that it's just creates a whole bunch of other elements that detracts from the investment. And I think the approval timelines is another one, lengthy regulatory processes. And you may go at a federal level, and I'm talking federal in the context of the United States, but you go maybe to a national level, to a state level, then to a city municipality level, you have to deal with 3 different rules in there, because just because the national level rules say one thing doesn't mean that the city is going to approve that. Especially when it comes to zoning, and this all comes back to urban planning coordination, and that traditionally has been very difficult, even for highways and roads. So we're thinking about a whole new environment where, we're trying to integrate vertiports with public transit and existing infrastructure, instead of treating it as an isolated aviation hub. And in my experience, working at airports, the first person they come to the airport. And I'm thinking, why are you bringing the AAMs to the airport? The whole process is to decentralize this. But they traditionally come to that one because that's what we know. So I think that some of the biggest challenges is to me, policy inertia. And I think balancing regulation with innovation is just one of the biggest challenges that we're going to be seeing as we start rolling out these systems.
Yeah. No, that's clear, and that's a good point. I mean, you raised a lot of times regulatory and let's say all this legal framework and around that, and I think Dunia can bring a great view on that, because she was part of the ICAO AM study, and I think we would like to understand how you see that from your perspective.
Well, I think that Diego already said a lot, and a lot of what I would like to say is actually echoing what Diego and even José and Maria said earlier, in that, vertiports are, in a way, one of the most critical elements of advanced air mobility ecosystem, right? As much as, eVTOLs are and so on, but they're really essential. Without vertiports, we won't have advanced air mobility, that's clear. But unlike, traditional airports or, more traditional, let's say, aviation infrastructure, which are governed by, international standards such as, ICAO's Annex 14 and so on, and also well-established regulatory frameworks, at the national level, at the regional level. Vertiports don't have that global, let's say, harmonized framework that they can rely on, or at least that gives them the ability to easily establish around the world, right? And that really raises a fundamental question in how do we design safe compliance infrastructure that also remains adaptable as technology evolves. If we go with a prescriptive regulatory model where we risk locking ourselves into, designs that are may become obsolete as eVTOL technology progresses. And on the other hand, if we take a too flexible and wait and see type of approach, we introduce uncertainty, delays, and really, potential safety risks ultimately. So to me, in my humble perspective, I think that the best path forward would be for regulators around the world to agree on a performance-based regulatory framework, and that one that actually defines, safety, operational benchmarks, while allowing for flexibility in how these benchmarks are met. And, this is really, when you think about it, this is how aircraft certification works. Regulators set safety outcomes, and manufacturers have the flexibility to meet those outcomes in, innovative ways. Another way or solution would be modular certification. Just as aircraft benefit from type certificates and supplemental type certificates, so STCs, that allow for incremental improvements without redoing the entire certification process. Vertiports, I think, could follow a similar approach, certifying landing zones, charging infrastructure, airspace integration modules separately. And in that way, new technology can be integrated seamlessly without requiring full recertification of, the entire vertiport. So all this to say that, there are, different methods out there, and there are, some regulators that have actually developed some interesting, let's say, frameworks, but without having that, harmonized, let's say, standard that other regulators can also rely on. We're going to have a problem, because we're going to have, one way of doing things here, another way of doing things there, and so on. And I think one last point that I wanted to mention was also that early regulatory coordination with airspace management, I think, is also essential, and that goes back to what Diego said. So, eVTOLs will operate in a shared low altitude airspace, and vertiports that, will be actually exist in urban environments will have to be designed to comply with, the evolving U-Space, UTM, CNS, ATM frameworks. And by taking a proactive approach, we can ensure that vertiports are not just, safe and compliant, but also scalable and adaptable for the longer term.
Thank you, Dunia. It's interesting how you talk about the regulation and so on. And the other thing is, we have a lot of listeners here. They're coming from architecture like me. So the question is how we translate this highly regulated framework of aviation to make aviation safe into architecture and design. And I think Dušan can bring a big knowledge on the table around that.
Thank you for the compliment. Well, it seems, as it was pointed out, that aviation part of the regulation is kind of still lacking development. The same way on the other side, as Diego was saying, that we have also the city social fabric regulations that also need to come up and pick up and meet those points. So on one hand, urban planning needs to take it into a consciousness that actually urban air mobility is possible and can be adopted by just general public. The question is actually how then to make general public conscious of this, and how to introduce them to all of this. So not only the architects, but everybody that would be actually using this platform. So what LYNEports is doing is also quite a good first step in this, that this border between ground and sky starts to getting blurred. So in a way, we have to build up Google Maps not only on 2D space, but actually also on the 3D space, right? So we need to get it a bit more activated, this crossing of both. And usually you would have then two approaches in doing that. One would be the economic kind of a profit driven choices, where you would start showing the actual benefit of developing an object that could host a vertiport, that could host a separate core inside that would be actually public, that could be used. So from the profitable perspective, developers would also need to see the actual benefit that this would bring. On the other side, we have the municipalities and city controllers and urban planners that also need to have a deeper look into which spaces can be activated with such activity. Because on the other hand, we don't want, as Diego was saying, we don't want them to be just merging with the airports of today. Airports of today have almost just a singular line of connection through the city. So they are really just a facility infrastructure that is kind of pushed outside of the cities. So we need to see what Dunia was saying on this scalable parts of vertiports. We don't need to make a huge facility for each of the vertiports to be hosting mass transit, but we could also see what would be the minimum impact. How can we have only one drone landing on one roof, and what would be the implication from structural perspective, sustainability, public versus private, how the actual building then is working, and how is it accepted in the people that are living in. So when everybody sees this benefit and when everybody can relate to it, this would be then these first steps that are taken, and as obvious, the progress is already been made, and with the conferences we can do only benefit to the vertiport and to the urban air mobility sector.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I think a big driver is let's say, or a big focus is on sustainability now, and I think that's the big thing around, let's say, advanced air mobility, drone or eVTOL activities, and I think that will reshape our infrastructure and transportation in a total different way. What do you think are the biggest challenges in making vertiports both eco-friendly and operational efficient? Are there any trade-offs, or, I would like to ask José, because I think, José, you can bring a lot of experience on that to the table like that.
Well, thank you. We are working in sustainable transport, in any case, in the Global Via Group, where we are doing also highways, metro, and tram, where we use a lot of megawatts, and we try to certify as the use of renewable green energy. This is important for us to minimize the carbon footprint, have net zero emissions in the company, and blueness is just a part of Global Via. We are also committed to helping the environment, to be eco-friendly, as you were saying, and also sustainable in the affordability or operational efficiency, because otherwise you can be green, but you don't survive. So we are looking at both sides, helping the environment and helping the people and ourselves, offering good services at good prices. What we try to do is minimize the environmental impact. It's very important because these vertiports are going to be in the middle of our cities, in our neighborhoods. So we need to look at the CO2 emissions, but also the noise that we are going to create there to generate in the citizenship, the turbulences or the downwash and outwash that we're going to have generated from the eVTOLs, and also the visual impact, not at the beginning, because there will be not many eVTOLs flying, but in the long term, when you see Star Wars and you see this congested sky already, the different lanes and altitudes and different corridors, this can impact also your view of the city. It will come in 100 years, not now. But I'm sure there will be also regulation on visual impact for the use of drones, cargo drones especially, because they will start connecting many parts of the cities. So we try to use green energy, at least be sustainable and independent in our terminal, to have solar panels and other means of sustainable energy, green energy there. And to recharge, sometimes we can bring, in remote areas, we could bring hydrogen fuel cells to transport megawatts from one place to the other. If we don't have the power grid available, we'll try to bring clean energy in any case to recharge the eVTOL, which will have consumptions of sometimes even half a megawatt. It's not just the small multi-rotors with 50 kilowatts. When you have some jets of 6 passengers, they are requiring peaks of 300, 400 kilowatt peak. So we're going to try to be sustainable and have the possibility of also democratizing this public transport by reaching automation, using robotics, not only in the air with eVTOLs, that we expect will bring down the cost when they are allowed to fly autopiloted, because in helicopter world, the pilots are big cost drivers. So we want to bring automation in the air with the eVTOLs, but also in the ground. We want to have robots in our vertiports with a lot of automation in the path, the pushback, the moving the eVTOL to the recharge station, and these kind of things. This, we expect, will bring down the cost a lot, together with artificial intelligence, which is something that we need to take into consideration to put it in the roadmap for certification, because automation will come a lot from artificial intelligence.
Definitely. Thank you. Dunia, I know you're working on sustainability a lot in Bureau Veritas, so I think you can talk a lot about that, right?
The first thing I want to say is that it's very exciting, to hear actually José Ignacio talk about sustainability in that wider sense. Okay, so and I'm going to kind of go back to my time at ICAO when I was participating in some of the work of the Advanced Air Mobility Study Group's sustainability, let's say, effort. So, in aviation, when we think about sustainability, we have this tendency to think about fuel efficiency and noise, and that's sustainability in aviation. But actually, with advanced air mobility, there were some, ideas, new ideas or new ways of thinking that were introduced into the conversation, and kind of looking at sustainability from a much, much broader perspective, from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals perspective. So, as much as in aviation, sustainability, environmental sustainability kind of came about at a later stage and became a concern at a later stage of the development of aviation. In advanced air mobility, we have the opportunity to start thinking sustainability in its wider sense from the offset, okay, as we're developing the different concepts. And, when you listen to Blue Nest's, take of sustainability, it's exciting, because really what they're doing is that they're looking at many, many different, perspectives and how these could have a positive impact, not only on, environmental concerns, but also on, let's say, societies and so on and so forth. So that's really great. And I think that ICAO ultimately is doing a great job in, through the outreach that it has been doing last year on advanced air mobility, has been doing a great job in promoting sustainability in that wider, let's say, sense. Now, I would just kind of mention one or two, let's say, trade-offs, let's say, to sustainability. So one of them would be, the upfront costs versus long-term resilience. So, I see that Blue Nest is very concerned about, sustainability and using the right materials from the offset and so on. But there are other companies out there. I don't know what they're thinking, but it can be easy to be tempted by using cheaper materials because it's just cost effective. So that's where starting to have that conversation around sustainability and making sure that the real longer term, let's say, resilience of the sector is also in one way or another tied to sustainable materials and modular designs, which yes happen to have higher upfront costs, but cutting corners risks higher emissions and shorter infrastructure lifespan. So there's that point. And then another point would be, to me, the accessibility, okay, versus exclusive hubs. If vertiports are built, to serve only premium passengers, they fail as sustainable urban mobility solutions, right? And so to me, the solution would be to mandate multimodal connectivity as part of vertiport certification, for example, ensuring that they integrate within the public transport networks. So all that comes to kind of, that incentive. Where does that incentive to actually do things the right way in a sustainable way, considering all the different elements that sustainability brings? So that actually the sector is developed in the best, and most sustainable way possible. And those incentives oftentimes, they come from policies, they come from standards, the regulations, and so on. And so that's where, I think that there is a sense of urgency within the regulatory community to start, expedite its efforts so that the sector benefits ultimately from it, and society as a whole, right?
I'm fully with you, and I was at the ICAO conference, at the Advanced Air Mobility Conference last year. Correct me if I'm September or November. I don't know it anymore. Exactly. I was there as well, and it was awesome to see the amount of people there really bringing efforts in this topic to make that happen. I liked that a lot. What you said. Thank you for that. The question what I have, we're talking a lot about advanced air mobility. We have these forums, we have these fairs and exhibitions, but do you really think the aviation industry, and that's what I've seen this week on the Rincón, is prepared for the rapid adoption of eVTOLs and drones? Or are we playing catch up? And where do you see the biggest gaps in the readiness? Dunia, it's still on your question. Yeah, I know. I see you. I don't see you.
Perfect, yeah. It's a great follow-up question. So that I think all of us kind of answered the question earlier. I think that the industry is advancing. There's no doubt. There still are some technological challenges, but I think that the hardest, the toughest, let's say, challenge that we need as a community and as an ecosystem to win is actually the regulatory. Not only the regulatory challenge that the regulation really is not that mature yet, but in addition, there's also another layer where you need to harmonize as well at some point. So, to give you an example, EASA has its own, drone regulation. It has developed quite some material. The FAA as well. China's Civil Aviation Authority has also, developed interesting regulation. But but there's no global standard yet, you know. And without a global standard, it's really hard to make sure that, you know, the whatever services that, you know, this industry is going to be able to provide actually are deployed, you know, around the world. And it's very hard also for the industry because, you know, having to navigate different regulatory frameworks from one region to another with different requirements, with different complexities, with different, it's also a very, very challenging. It's very long, it's very lengthy, it's very costly also, because you need to have, you know, different expertise that is able to understand the differences and so on and so forth. So that's one, you know, big challenge that I do see. Sorry, Michael. And then there's also the question of the airspace readiness, that it's still evolving. You know, the ATM and UTM systems are not yet fully aligned for high density VTOL operations. You know, it's complicated. And then there's also the question of autonomy. Piloting, you know, and autonomous operations lack a clear roadmap today. So, you know, some questions that can arise is, should eVTOL pilots follow fixed wing or rotorcraft licensing requirements? It's still, you know, this part, let's say, of regulation is still not there, and could eventually slow scalability. So that's really my, you know, take on it. I'm sure that other speakers here have also a lot to share about that. Yeah. And I'm curious actually to hear what they have to say.
Thank you, Dunia. I also see it from a different perspective. I see it from the OEM and operation perspective. So I think that's also maybe the enemy in my bed, what I feel a little, because that's what I have seen this week on the Verticon. They're only on the Joby. They have presented their concept, or let's say their aircraft. And I would like to hear from Payal, but I'm not sure if she's back. Payal, out there?
I am. I'm not sure if you're unable to see or hear me. I can hear and see you clearly. I'm not sure what the issue is, but I hope I'm clear.
You are crystal clear, and we're happy to hear from you at least. But as we said and learned, you're operating Blade India, and you're an operator, so yes, you should be highly impacted on what is next. So tell me, or us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to connect with the panel. I can give you the India story. Essentially, it's been a very interesting journey, what we've been doing over here in India. You know, we actually started back in 2019 to basically be India's first heli-taxi service. And it got really interesting because we were actually able to see you know, India is a great market as far as urban congestion goes, because we have really, really crowded towns and cities. And helicopters were actually proving to be a great solution. But the problem in India, which is very unique, is the fact that we have only about 250 helicopters in the entire country, in the entire geography. So, and that is a really, really small number, of which probably 10% are available for commercial use. So for the India market, I think, you know, it is the most natural course to move from helicopters today into, you know, into eVTOLs and UAM in the future, because there is definitely a need to solve the problem of urban congestion. We are already displaying a very successful business model with helicopters today, and the transition is but natural with electric into the future. And we have actually, you know, at Blade secured certain landing sites or helipads, which we have sort of created in different parts of busy cities, which we will use to basically translate into vertiports of tomorrow. So we are sort of creating that ecosystem in India to actually just plug and play the UAM piece in the future when the regulatory bodies actually give their clearance. So while we will wait for the FAA and EASA to set the guidelines, the Indian regulator, that is the DGCA, is actually taking a lot of interest in UAM. We hosted the Urban Air Mobility Expo in India back in January 2025, where we had operators from around the world, vertiport companies, regulators, UATM companies come together to understand the India market opportunity and and how much UAM will play a huge role here. So I think from the India perspective, it is just a matter of changing the form factor and using UAM in the place of the helicopter business and helipads.
Interesting. Thank you, Payal. Maria, as you was with Volocopter, how do you think it from the OEM perspective?
I also wanted to add that it's very much also different from the country perspective. And I just wanted to add an interesting experience that I had. I was in China in October last year on the conference where I presented also the principles of integrating advanced air mobility infrastructure. And in China, they didn't call advanced air mobility as such, but they define it as low altitude economy. And I really like this definition because I think it's ambition, but it's also an interesting strategical vision, because we are not always talking about passenger drone transportation. But if we look broader, we're looking about also unmanned drones, and it can be like everything of delivery drones and filming and security and agricultural complexes and LiDAR, 3D scanning, whatever. So we are talking really about the emerging economy of low altitude transportation. I found it interesting, and in China again there was like a shift in focus from, let's say, from the certification and regulatory perspective rather on this integration into the airspace. But like coming back to the question, I see still a couple of challenges in terms of industry readiness for advanced air mobilities, and we talked also a lot about the sustainability aspect. And I think the sustainability, of course, is one of the biggest benefits of advanced air mobility, because it allows you to actually integrate in very densely populated areas. Because there is no CO2, and actually the level of noise, if you compare it with helicopter, is significantly lower for air taxis. But at the same time, it's a sort of a challenge because if you're talking about technical capacity of the batteries, they are not at the level of the development so that we could provide really very long distances passenger transportation, because you need to have a redundancy, you need to change the batteries, and you need to also to track all the, let's say, production cycle of the battery from the production until you don't use it anymore in the aircraft, until you use it somewhere else, because there is still some capacity. So I think this is one of the challenges that I see. Also, like we talked a lot already about the regulatory environment, and I'm not fully agree here like that we need to regulate everything and to set the additional regulations. I rather would say that if you, let's say, see in retrospective, if you see like how the aviation industry have been developed, and it's over 100 years now, but at the beginning you had this room for trial and error and for learning by doing opportunities, because the regulations level was actually very low. So you had the opportunity to test, to try. You had a more freedom in terms of testing that you have now. And again, we talked also already, we mentioned that existing aviation standards are not always 100% applicable to advanced air mobility. And then if you're coming also to, let's say, to practical questions, you also have to ensure the production. If we're talking about mobility, and if we're talking about the concept that you can actually provide a sort of air taxi service to the passenger, and if you want to build a network, you physically need to have enough aircraft. You physically need to have a network of aircraft. You need to produce them, and let's say if we calculate for a good case scenario that a startup can produce, let's say, 50 aircraft per year, it will take still some period of time before you have enough aircraft so that you can physically cover enough like sufficient network and that you can make your business model financially sustainable. And as Payal mentioned, in India, you have like 200 something helicopters, and obviously for such a big countries, it's not enough. And the same will and is actually still valid for air taxis services. We talked also about the airspace integration. I think I don't need to mention this, but yeah, you need to, and that was one of the biggest focus of this Chinese conference, for example, how you integrate advanced air mobility in already densely packed airspace, and you need to ensure all the path and safety, and you need to provide, let's say, a protection for the building. You need to create the geofencing and stuff like this. And I think the last aspect that I think is important also to mention is the public acceptance. So when I did like my research for my previous master thesis, for example, there was not enough written let's say, scientific information on advanced air mobility. So I made an interview with different experts from aviation industry, and they all pointed out like one of the key success factors for implementing advanced air mobility would be like the public acceptance, because all the discussions that we have now and all the talks and all the interest, that actually like most of it comes from aviation professionals, aviation enthusiasts. We're not hearing that much from the public. Like let's say the future customer is not in the call. So we don't really know how these ideas or how this information actually lands. And it may be like a crucial factor, and we need to establish a dialogue also with the public and raise the public awareness and show like how advanced air mobility can practically implement it. And I think in this way, the software and the test flights and all the demonstrations and all this visualization can actually help in this sense.
Now, you're fully right. I hear also, I mean, human-centric design, and the design brings me back to the planning process. As I said, architecture and design is a key, or plays a key role in my point of view of creating social acceptance. I would like to drop this question back to Dušan, and as you are, let's say, quite in, let's say, design and nature concepts, can you mention maybe an example from your experience?
Well, the first thing I would like to point out on the sustainability part is as Dunia mentioned, it's coming from the holistic approach. So and also the whole chain of materials, the whole design of the buildings, all of this thing, when it's thought about holistically, it can be the impact of sustainability can be much bigger. So, for example, pointing out the noise issue, I would like to say that all of the to drone manufacturers, you are not alone. It's not only a engine issue, it's also architectural issue, it's also design issue, it's also placing it in the correct position within the city issue, right? So when we have this kind of an overview of all of the benefits that we can when we have the macro lens on, it's quite a benefit. On other hand, I was developing, if we step then even further into the future, there was a public call on designing the airport for the year 2100. So how do you tackle this again holistically, right? So if we step back and we just rethink how will people actually travel, then probably the blur or the activity of travel will be blurred out, so that when you travel you already are doing some other things. And coming from this architectural or general public dream of a carless city, probably we will have some sort of platforms that are driving around that can either host public transport, that can either host maybe offices, that can either host cargo, and then these machines are actually then together with all of the AI and everything that could be given at point, create its own organism. So, for example, I have a couple of pictures to share. I'll be I'll be quite brief. But for example, I took an example of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta Airport, and I called it the International Driving Airport, right? Meaning that all of these so-called platforms would actually be a swarm of pods that would communicate with each other, that would actually then either host different programs, as previously said, and then the airport and all of the other infrastructural facilities, they become obsolete because the airport would merely represent only the junction between the sky and the ground. Because previously, I don't know, a couple of decades ago, it was very romantic to travel with airplane. Recently, it's more portrayed as a hassle than anything else. So infrastructural facilities, from everything that the city needs would be well hidden from the public eyes, and then so as well would be the airports. Airport then represents a junction, and these platforms, when they are a swarm, they actually, when they collect together, they would form an airplane. They become an airplane. So, for example, in this constellation that I'm showing here, an airplane is merely a frame. It's just a grid which then gets hosted by the pods, which serve it with the energy, and it's more just a platform of aerodynamic properties, right? So, in this way. Similarly, your platform becomes an airplane, and then similarly, this would be a airplane topic. We would have also something that would be more on a drone or a VTOL topic. So when you would need this platform to become a VTOL, it becomes with this what I call the so-called flying crown. And there's a whole grid that allows that this crown attaches to the pod, becomes a vertical airplane, and then when it lands, becomes a vehicle. Or all of this time, it's basically just an office. So the transfer doesn't exist as an activity because the activity is inside. That would be primary. So we have two, let's call, innovations from the aviation perspective, but we also cannot forget the existing technology, which could have a bit of an impact of having still the existing framework, but airport, again, to blur the image between the land side, air side, the actual airplane would peek into the airport, and then the ground would actually become the stairs or the ramps that would then host, again, either seats that are already driving. So basically the airplane is empty, but the seat is the one that gets hosted inside. So with this opportunity, when we can have such a macro view, we can also say that probably the same as technology of building would be different. So you would have either some sort of a fiber printed material that could then be and recyclable and adoptable to host all of these structures up in the air. So somehow, as Atlanta was a very interesting point for me, as considered the city in the forest. If this fabric solution of structural integrity is also hosting some sort of a vegetation, then that would also mean that would be an airport in the forest, or basically a forest airport itself. And yes, it was an awarded and recognized piece of work, which was done quite some time ago. But building on that, I'm still pushing forward some of these ideas into the current role that I have.
That's really amazing. Thank you for sharing. If you can put it back, I like that idea that's coming up something to my mind. And let's say summarizing so far what we discussed. On the one hand, aviation is a highly regulated industry. Otherwise, let's say with AM, I think we are able to pushing the boundaries of innovation, what I like to see from your end, Dušan. And also what we learned, and what Maria said, as LYNEports involved, we need to make sure both compliance and design flexibility will align, and let's say will be a challenge in the future. And there's one thing is coming up to my mind. I'm sure you're all aware, let's say at least the architects are aware of SIADA and an aviation engineering software. What is pivotal for the completion of the Frank Gehry's Guggenheim Museum was used back in the days. Do you think that digital planning software can play a similar role in advanced air mobility infrastructure, like the CIADA's one, or software can, let's say, frame buildings and let's say, as you said, let's say enclosures for something?
Well, currently we are at this point of the future where the AI is taking stronger and stronger role, and I see it interesting as it does have the potential to give the unintuitive solutions, something that you would not expect. And these ones would be not only the drivers of the design, but these ones would also be the ones that would communicate in the airspace, the ones that would communicate the positioning of the program within the city. Maybe some program could be placed in a city where you wouldn't think, because you are allowed so much of simulation, so much of iteration. So that's a good tool to have, as we have then this possibility of potential or exponential amount of iterations that we can do and test designs and implement other industries to see what would their input be and have a holistic then output, not only as a design, but connecting all of the industries and working together.
Thanks, Dušan. Maria, if I'm not mistaken, there was a kind of similar approach with volocopter back in the days, correct? So they made volocopter designs of buildings with a different schematic or, let's say, approach, right?
Well, I mean, definitely we used all the available digital software to design the building, to design an aircraft, to simulate, to make the simulation before you start the actual real-time testing. I think it's hard to underestimate the importance of the software generally, because it only it makes our life easier as a planners, designers, technicians, but it also helps to check all the simulation aspects and to make the passenger transportation safer, and also to, as I said before, to show the public that it actually can be safe, because we calculated all possible scenarios. We calculated the weather forecast for flying. We calculated the different type of aircrafts and all the possibilities to take off and land, and all the possibilities of, let's say, emergency landing and stuff like this. And in my current role in consulting company, for example, we use artificial intelligence on the daily basis. Of course, we work with ChatGPT, and for example, again to the topic of regulations, since in order to build and to actually realize something, you need to make the regulations a little bit easier, or you need to make them a little bit easier to work with. And for example, like EASA, there are like thousands of regulations, and they are constantly being updated, as you know. And let's say if you have some certain question to the compliance on the EASA regulations, the let's say the classical approach is that you address the expert and you ask and you wait for sometimes for a long time for the qualified response. And so, for example, my colleagues, they developed the software, the kind of application for ChatGPT that through this application that works with OpenAI, you can ask the general and specific questions to EASA regulations. And this application ensures that GPT actually makes a reliable answer that is like factually correct, and makes the concrete reference on the concrete absatz of these particular regulations. So you basically can shorten the time of having this feedback on the regulatory requirements with the software, and you basically can eliminate, to a certain extent, you can eliminate the experts. So you can actually process all your questions quicker, and you can actually come to the execution process quicker with the software. So this is, of course, makes our life way better.
Thank you, Maria, for that. But that brings us to really exclusive design of eVTOLs, as you said, and on the other hand, the vertiports. Diego, I would like to ask you, from your experience in airports, what do you think is crucial to make advanced air mobility accessible for a wider public?
I think we talked a little bit about it. Public acceptance is the one most important. If without a business model, all of this is just dreams, and that's the reality. We need an operator that has a business plan and that has the ability to actually convince people that this is a way, that it's safe, that it's reliable, that it's affordable, that it's a better option to what is existing. And I think in some cases for remote areas, and I saw Dušan's, it's interesting that, we're trying to apply, this concept to a hub airport where, we're trying to also figure out how to decentralize hubs. And in the cases of Hartsfield, it's like, yeah, everybody's shifting into one area to get redistributed, but I think some remote locations would be ideal for that. But how do you actually access a remote location when you don't have the density to actually make a business case? At the end of the day, there's a recovery of investment, there's an operation, there's a business model that has to work within this regulatory environment. And I think that shifts, a little bit away from even all of that, because we start talking about regulatory approvals. Well, we haven't talked about risk and risk avoidance and what does that risk cause. I mean, you're talking about insurance issues. I mean, we've had many examples in the U.S. I mean, there's a vertiport that was designed. It's at the convention center in Dallas. It's probably the first vertiport designed for an Osprey, and it was a different kind of, not what we're talking about now, but it was designed, with helicopter, but it's laid out that way. It's ready to operate. And the city of Dallas was trying to get somebody to operate an air helicopter taxi operation for a long time. But the risk requirements that the city of Dallas was putting out on what that operator was just made that business model just not profitable for anybody, because carrying that insurance was just, prohibitive. And I think that's kind of where it starts getting even muddier and muddier when you start talking about, okay, let's say that we're moving forward and there's an accident. It's like, so who's responsible or autonomous? Is it the manufacturer? Is it the operator? How do you go about through that? And how do you iron that out? So I think the biggest challenge is definitely going to be figuring out what the business model that's reliable and convincing people that they want to support that business model. I think there's going to be a lot of test runs, but I think that I think at the end of the day, it becomes a lot of how much risk are you willing to accept into getting into a business model? Because that's kind of where we're at. A lot of us would like to see it because we're enthusiasts, and I think Maria mentioned that. We're all airport and airplane geeks, but we don't. But we're the worst business people because we dream loud, but we don't have the funding for it. And I think that's kind of like brings it back to it. I sometimes have to take that dreamer hat off and say, does this make sense or not? Is this going to be a viable business model? And I think that's where, we love the technology. We love to see it. We love to see how it's going. But how is it going to turn into, something that generates profit? Because at the end of the day, that's what's going to drive a business model. It's not I love the idea that Dunia was talking about, that for the benefit of humanity. Well, I love the concept. But the reality is that nobody's going to do it pro bono.
I'm an idealist. Sorry.
We're all seeing what our friend Elon Musk he was doing with with rocket technology, but now we see where he's going. There was no pro bono anywhere in there. So at some point, there is a business element. There's a business decision that comes out to this, and the R&D, even with SpaceX, for example, which I think is pretty amazing. To be honest with you, I think everything that's been done with vertical takeoff and landing and recovery of rockets is just Nacho was talking about Star Wars stuff. That's Star Wars stuff. I mean, when you start seeing those boosters land vertically, it's pretty impressive. But it's going to take that kind of push. And I think when you start talking about moving cargo is one thing, but when you move passengers, it's a whole nother ballpark when it comes to risk assurance. And again, coming back to wrapping it up, which is public perception. Is this something I want to get?
Yeah. Dunia, you raised your hand. Please go ahead.
No, it's actually just so I completely agree with Diego. The financial aspect of it is really essential, and what we're seeing, in the smaller, let's say cargo drones world, is that there are some pilot tests that are taking place around the world. a lot of, for instance, international organizations such as the WFP, the World Economic Forum, they've tried, to use drones, smaller drones, and in the context of, let's say health or providing, food to communities that are, for one reason or another disconnected from the rest, or for whom it would take a very long time to reach the closest village, let alone hospital. And I think that a lot of these kind of pilot tests can inform eventually the eVTOL and vertiport and advanced air mobility sector, because a lot of what they do, they're able to collect data, and the eVTOL world is not necessarily able at this point to do so. So maybe there's some lessons that we can take, we can kind of gather from other use cases that are not necessarily exactly the advanced air mobility use cases, but that have in one way or another some similarities with operations that could take place in the future.
Yeah, you're fully right. I would like to ask José about that, because he has a lot of experience, as we learned from the infrastructure and piece. José, if you could change one thing about how we plan, or let's say aerodromes and vertiports, heliports even today, if you would like to change something, what would it be? And are there any outdated processes that need to be evolved?
Thank you. So many things to change. I will choose a couple of them. We were talking about the boss is telling us, show me the money. That's real. We are dreamers, and we want this dream to come true. I think the speed of certification standards for vertiports and for eVTOLs came a bit before, but still the documents are not finished, and some companies are struggling to get the type certificate, especially from Europe. So I would change the support we're getting from the regulation to create bigger teams that help the industry to grow bigger and higher. Also, there is a roadmap to certify artificial intelligence. This equation, this Sudoku puzzle of the airports coming into cities is going to have so many regulations and parameters that we need to consider that as human beings, we cannot control everything. So this idea, for example, of LYNEports to put everything in a mixer, all these regulations, and use artificial intelligence to help you with the decision making, this is crucial, because otherwise it will take us also a lot of time to find the right or the optimal answer to deploying into a city with so many buildings around, the wind canyons that it can generate. We are lacking a lot of data at the moment. So imagine when we are deploying vertiports, we need to find the optimal route within a crowded city. So I would try to push artificial intelligence to be certifiable, for at least for design. Some tools that should be also getting to a path of trying to get certified, to get results, even if you need to check later. Human intervention needs to be there in the loop to validate the design. And as I was saying, the interoperability between the regulations and the speed of regulations should be improved. I see ICAO is going at a good pace, but insufficient, I think, to help the industry to thrive, to have the first deployment of air routes and vertiports in less than 5 years. So we need proper certification in 5 years for the vertiports, not only for the eVTOLs.
Yeah, we start to get questions from the audience, and I think we should catch them up. José, maybe and you can help with that, because one question was regarding the Franco Gehry's Guggenheim CATIA software, which was an aviation engineering software used for the architecture engineering. What is the software, what they used, and will we see similar things in vertiport on AM infrastructure? This is the question.
Yes. So we are using numerical models in Excel. We are using AutoCAD. Okay. We are using 3D Studio. We're using a mix. And we are looking forward to try very soon the LYNEports software, because it's going to help to combine all these numerical calculations of complying with the standards with the visual tools that are also helpful to, to even simulate routes and simulate the flights and orient properly the approach trajectories. We hope that these tools in the future will have also, let's say, functions to include the deployment of digital data sources like micro weather stations across the city, and coverage maps. Also, noise is very important, how the noise will be move in the city with the wind. So we need to go to the second derivative, to different very complex formulas. So we need help, we need tools, and at the moment we don't have the right tools. So we like this Sims game of LYNEports that we want to really be engaged to try it, because I think it's going to be the first version of many, and it will have later on also competition, because it's very important. At the moment, you have some simulation tools built for airports like Transoft and other things. You can play with the capacity, okay, and the demand. And we saw also some tools developed ad hoc for the terminal capacity of vertiports. So we are seeing some solutions already in the market.
Thank you. Another question from the audience, and it's more in the direction of Payal and Dunia. Feel free to answer. What are the biggest challenges in developing charging, refueling infrastructure for electric and hybrid electric advanced air mobility vehicles?
I'm happy to take that first. So basically, in my market at least, the biggest challenge with developing, charging capabilities and infrastructure is the available. So UAM is needed in congested cities to solve the problem of, congestion. But the problem with congested cities is that land parcels are very, very difficult to find. So in order to set up these eVTOL charging infrastructure, the first thing is basically to actually identify available land parcels in already very busy Indian cities. And once you do that, obviously getting the support of the local administration that is managing the electricity for the respective municipality or region. So depending on the charging infrastructure requirements for different types of vehicles, we haven't gotten there yet in India. It's very, very, very nascent. But that will be from case to case. But I think our biggest challenge will be identifying available land first to set up these EV charging stations and hopefully integrate them not just for UAM, but also for cars and for, basically bringing together like a multimodal hub for EV charging would basically help the city at large rather than restricting it to UAM. I think that's my input for India.
Thank you. Dunia, you want to comment?
Yeah, I think maybe the high power demand, I'd say, eVTOLs require, and that's been already addressed earlier, but significantly, more power for charging due to their larger battery packs and the need to charge quickly for efficient operations. So I think, this high power would demand, would pose really challenges for the electrical grid and may also require significant, infrastructure upgrades to support, eVTOL charging. And then there's also, the regulatory and safety considerations, and the integration of eVTOL charging infrastructure into existing aviation and transportation regulations poses challenges that, we kind of agreed on it. And so those safety standards and those certification processes need to be developed to ensure, the safe operation of eVTOLs. So yeah, I think that would be one of the challenges, and also the cost and the financing of these high power charging infrastructure. Those would be my three main challenges.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. I have another question coming in. What's one misconception people have about vertiports and urban air mobility? What aspect do you think needs more public awareness, Dunia?
I think that, okay, it's a very good question. And I think that, often, and it comes from, the drone. The drone is often associated with warfare, and I think that in that sense, a lot of everything, that comes out of, the development of drones into, eVTOLs and so on, all of that, the normal person will always kind of associate it in one way or another to that. I think that there's a little bit of deconstruction to do in that sense. And one way to do it is to actually highlight some of the really great, use cases of drones in today's world that actually, are happening around the world. And for example, zipline is one example, but I have a feeling that zipline is an example that, us as a community, we know very well. But then when you start talking to people that don't know anything about drones, they're not going to necessarily know about this use case. And there's many other examples really out there in Canada, for example, and so on. So that would be one point. I see that Maria also has her hand raised, so maybe you can also.
Oh, go ahead, Maria. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, like from my perspective, I had a feeling that one of the biggest misconceptions is also the noise, or the perception of noise.
Yeah.
Because like the majority of people who are not anyhow related to aviation, when we're talking about advanced air mobility, they immediately think like they're trying to connect it with something that they know, and they think about helicopters. And of course, they recall that helicopters are extremely loud. You cannot hear anything when the helicopter is landing. But actually, like I was like when we were opening the hangar in Volocopter, for example, we had like a test in flights on the vertiport in front of the new hangar, and we were standing just there, and I was impressed how not noisy, like it's very quiet. When it's at a certain height, you don't really hear an aircraft, and it flies like back and forth, and you see it, but you don't really hear it. Of course, if we are talking about like multiple aircraft, multiple drones in the air, they will bring certain like noise congestion. But we also can like develop a certain paths within the city, let's say above the river or above a certain road where you already have all this noise pollution. And again, at a certain height, you really don't hear it that much. And I think that like one of the biggest misconceptions is that people automatically think that it will be extremely noisy. And this is what we can change by all these public demonstrations, like in testing, and just bringing more information about how it actually works and how it actually is in the reality.
Then I can just put one input. Sorry, just one more thing. I also think that the perception of urban air mobility and air mobility in general is restricted, at least in the minds of the administrators, the state government, is that this is not going to target the common man. This is still going to target, probably a percentage of the people who are, say, considered the elite or the uber elite. And unfortunately, when it comes to a lot of, administrative support, they are targeting basically the vote bank. The people who are actually going to bring these administrators back into power, right? The politicians, the bureaucrats, etc. And unfortunately, the perception is this is going to not really, unlike trains or roadways, help the masses, which is why the focus isn't as high, to help out with this particular space. And I think that's something that I just wanted to add in addition to everything that Dunia and Maria said.
No, thank you. Thank you. I have a point to add from my end. You know what is the game changer in my point of view? These drone shows. These drone shows are fully accepted. Everyone sees that. They are not noisy. We have 1,000 of drones in the air, and it's awesome. It's awesome that people love it. and they don't see it as the enemy anymore, the drone who's taking pictures. This is the thing what the people like. And I'm looking forward to see more of that. I would like to ask, sorry, someone wanted to add?
I was saying drones, yes, but eVTOLs people will still perceive will be noisier because they're bigger and passenger carrying. Yeah.
For sure. I have another question came in. How can future aerodromes design minimize the risk of accidents through improved runway configurations, advanced navigation systems, and enhanced emergency response protocols? I don't know who wants to take on this question. Maybe Jose or Diego.
Yeah, could you? I'll tackle it. Was the question again was about runway orientations and.
No, how can future aerodrome designs minimize the risk of accidents through improved runway configurations, advanced navigation systems, and enhanced emergency response protocols?
Well, runway alignment is predicated on wind, historical wind. So at some point, trying to reorient runways to adapt to AAM seems like a non-starter. It's something that we just can't control. The wind blows, and that's how we align the runways. How to minimize the interaction? I think I come back to the same thing that at some point, what's the business model going to look like? If it's feeding into a hub for traditional airlines, then that's going to be quite interesting and quite complex. There's no question about that. We see that interaction with the AAMs and just regular aircraft, not vertical takeoff, but just, fixed wing aircraft, if you would. That's been always a challenge. I mean, helicopter operations and aircraft operate at airports quite well, but the density of helicopter operations at most airports is not that high to begin with. Where we're talking about is higher density of that, like just Dušan's example of Hartsfield, for example. There's going to be a transition point. It's, where you have all of them operating in there. So that's going to be quite complex. I'm a little bit more interested in the point-to-point service rather than a hub. I'm much more interested in service levels going back out to like connecting destinations that are not easily accessible. And I think that goes back to some of the comment that this is going to be only for the elite. Well, that's kind of like what makes it. When you start looking at these services being connecting remote areas to main areas, that's when you start seeing some kind of benefit at some point. But that business model is very difficult. There's no question about that. If you're just flying, I mean, LAX is a perfect example of where LAX airport has a heliport on top of the on the parking garage. It's rarely used. The helicopter operations in Los Angeles are between buildings, and for very wealthy people to go downtown and leave downtown, or to go somewhere else, or to avoid traffic for the most part. But I think that's exactly what Payal was talking about. That's accessible to, sports stars and Hollywood directors and everybody else. And so you don't get any kind of interest from anybody on that. And I think but going back to the question, how do you minimize that interaction? I think you can't, and I'm very US centric because I think that there's a lot of capacity if I start talking about Riyadh, for example, the capacity issues or the demand issues for a runway system, for example, in Riyadh relative to Hartsfield, is a totally different animal. Riyadh is probably a much better place where you can start figuring out how to integrate that, also because you have a lot more control at a national level of what is acceptable or not. It could be a national initiative that is actually driven down, top down, and saying we're going to implement this. And so I see a lot of examples of business models or how to use it at airports coming not necessarily from the United States, but elsewhere where there's a little bit more room to operate and test things. And I think that we were looking a little bit about that. And I think that's ultimately what's going to drive how this operates in a safe environment, is by working in environments that are not driving it. We can't start, it'd be a great market to get into JFK or LaGuardia, but God help, that's almost impossible from a business model, from a risk analysis. We have to start somewhere else. And I think that's kind of what's going to drive, what the traffic control and what the modernization things that we need to do with airports to keep some separation between that. It's quite timely because we just saw something very similar at National Airport in Washington, D.C., where you have a helicopter operation with a aircraft to final approach, and that was disastrous. And that's, just imagine that replicated at many other airports around the world. It's difficult. They still try to do it, and it still exists. It's not something that we haven't dealt with before, and I guess that's that's the answer right now. That at higher densities, it becomes quite challenging, without a doubt.
No, fully aligned. Thanks, Diego. Jose, you wanted to give something as well, right?
Oh, yes. Actually, we're working a lot in emergency management. We are doing this project, Eureka. Unfortunately, it was with Lilium, also volocopter there, Pipistrel. So we are trying to already not only cater for electrical fire with lithium batteries, containment and things like that, thermal propagation, but also we are trying to estimate how if we have a failure of a severe failure with a fire, electrical fire, how much time do we need to take the fire, to put the fire down, or also if we have a crash. I mean, we're taking measurements, we're taking estimates. Also the diversion vertiports, I mean the contingency vertiports we need in the area. Sometimes these vehicles only have a reserve buffer of 20%. It can look like a lot, but when it's only 30 kilometers, 40 kilometers, in 5 minutes you can consume the 20% buffer. So sometimes you will need contingency vertiports or rally points. Before you fly, you need to determine different emergency vertiports, or even not only a vertiport, it can be an open space or a park that you can activate as a vertiport. So we are working in that, in different mechanisms. Mostly, and about precision landing, navigation for me is very important. When we want to reach autonomy and autopiloting, we need to have a lot of redundancy. The more traffic you have in a vertiport, the more certification you will need for it. So we are looking not only for GPS positioning, we'll need redundancy in the communications and also in the position. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jose. We're running to the end. Maria, it's time for the really last thoughts. We have just a couple of minutes left. So Maria, please, it's your stage.
Yeah. I will be just quick. I just wanted to add to what Jose was talking, that also you can mitigate like the way, in the way how you fly. And actually for volocopter at the beginning, there were established different flying scenarios and different flying paths. So at the beginning you fly above non-populated area, then you fly above, let's say, forest or maybe some industrial areas. Then when you establish an enough level of safety, you can fly over the living areas. And also, like, just a small example of like what you were also saying about the batteries. This is like the problem with batteries, that they are exposed to fire, and that's why, for example, you can store the batteries separate from aircraft itself. So for example, again, in volocopter we had like a separate container for the batteries, and close to this container we had like a fire extinguishing container, and all the personnel, all the facility management and flight testing, and all the people who will be working on the vertiport, they were actually trained on how to use this fire emergency safety measures. So this is how we also ensure the safety on the vertiport.
Thank you, Maria. Any other thoughts? Comments? Questions? We have a lot of questions from the audience, but we are running out of time, guys. Sorry about that. Let me give to the panel a last, let's say, 2 cents on that. I have to thank you all for being part of that today, specifically thanking LYNEports for making that possible today. And thank you for sharing your insights and the vision of the future of advanced air mobility. The challenges and opportunities we've explored today, I think, highlight the need for collaboration, innovation, and forward-thinking solutions as we, all of you, design the next generation of aerodromes and vertiports. We've seen that safety, efficiency, and sustainability is not just a guiding principle, they're essential to making advanced air mobility viable and integrated a part of our cities. The evolution of technology, regulatory adaptation, and sustainable infrastructure will shape how we bring urban air mobility to life. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Bye-bye.